He made a huge mistake. Those were the words that followed me all the way home, slipping into the quiet corners of my mind, repeating themselves with every red light, every breath I took behind the steering wheel. I didn't even know the man who said them. I had never seen his face before that afternoon. Yet the way he spoke, low, careful, as if he were handing me something fragile, made my chest tighten before I could stop it. It happened on a Tuesday, ordinary, forgettable, the kind of day that disappears into the others if nothing goes wrong. I was standing outside the pharmacy, the automatic doors sliding open and shut behind me, carrying the faint smell of disinfectant and cheap perfume into the cool air. I remember fumbling in my purse looking for my keys when a stranger cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am." I turned, already halfway annoyed, ready to brush off a sales pitch or a request for spare change. He looked normal, mid-40s maybe, dark jacket slightly worn at the cuffs. His eyes kept flicking toward the street as if he wasn't sure he should be there at all. "Yes," I said. He hesitated long enough that I thought he might walk away. Then he met my eyes and said very quietly, "Your husband made a huge mistake." Time did that strange thing it does when something lands too close to your heart. The sliding doors froze mid-whisper, cars slowed, my fingers curled tight around my keys. "I'm sorry," I said, "I think you have the wrong person." He shook his head, not dramatic, just sad. "I don't." I laughed. I actually laughed because what else do you do when a stranger steps out of nowhere and reaches into your life like that? "You don't even know me," I said. He nodded again. "I know who you are." That's when fear crept in, not panic, something colder, more alert. He looked down at his hands before speaking again. I debated saying anything, but if it were my wife, he trailed off, then took a small breath. "Just be careful, that's all I wanted to say." "And you're not going to explain?" I asked. His lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll find out soon enough." Then he stepped back, turned, and merged into the flow of people on the sidewalk, leaving me there with questions I hadn't asked for and a weight in my chest I didn't recognize yet. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. Before that day, my life had been steady, not perfect but honest enough that I trusted it. My husband Daniel and I had been married for 17 years. We met young, too young, some people said, working at the same grocery store while finishing community college. He stocked shelves, I worked the register. He had a crooked smile and a laugh that made you feel chosen. I liked the way he listened, really listened, like my words mattered even when I was rambling. We built a life brick by brick, a small house on a quiet street. Beige siding, creaky stairs, a porch that needed repainting every other summer. 2 kids, Emily, now 16, sharp and observant in a way that scared me sometimes, and Noah, 12, still soft around the edges, still willing to hold my hand in public if he thought no one would notice. Daniel worked in property management. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Long hours, especially lately, but he always came home smelling faintly of dust and aftershave, loosening his tie as soon as he walked in the door. We had routines: dinner at 6:30, television murmuring in the background, coffee together on Saturday mornings while the kids slept in. If you had asked me that morning whether I was happy, I would have said yes without thinking too hard. Happiness to me had become quiet, predictable, safe. On that Tuesday, Daniel had kissed my cheek before leaving for work, his hand resting at the small of my back like it always did. "Don't forget to pick up my prescription," I'd called after him. "It's on my reminder app," he said, tapping his phone, smiling. Nothing about that moment warned me. That's what haunted me later, the normalcy of it all. The way love can look so ordinary while something else is quietly unraveling beneath the surface. I told myself the stranger was nothing, a mistake, a prank, someone else's problems spilling into my day by accident. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had almost convinced myself. Almost. That evening, Daniel was quieter than usual, not distant, just contained. He stirred his food without eating much, nodded when the kids talked, his phone lighting up beside his plate more times than it used to. "You tired?" I asked. "Long day," he said, "couple of issues at work." I watched his jaw tighten as he spoke. I told myself that meant stress, work pressure, bills, life. Still, when I went to bed that night, I lay awake listening to the familiar sounds, the hum of the ceiling fan, the creak of the house settling, and wondered why a stranger's voice had lodged itself so firmly in my thoughts. He made a huge mistake. Daniel shifted beside me. Turning onto his side, his back to mine, that was new, or maybe it wasn't and I was only noticing now. I reached out, my fingers brushing his arm. He didn't pull away, but he didn't turn back either. "You okay?" I whispered. "Just tired," he murmured. I closed my eyes, told myself to sleep, promised I wouldn't let a random encounter poison a marriage built over 17 years. But somewhere deep down, something had already cracked, and I could feel it faint and spreading like a hairline fracture you don't see until the light hits it just right. The next few days tried their best to be normal. I woke up, packed lunches, reminded Noah to bring his science project, nagged Emily about the way she left wet towels on her floor. I grocery shopped, answered emails, folded laundry while a crime show droned on in the background. Life doesn't stop to give you space for your suspicions. It just keeps moving, piling dishes in the sink and bills in the mailbox. But the stranger's words had planted a seed, and every little thing became water. On Thursday, Daniel came home late, not outrageous late, just enough to notice. The kind of late where dinner goes lukewarm and you start rearranging plates on the counter. I checked the time, 7:18 p.m. I called him, it rang 3 times before he answered. "Hey," he said, slightly out of breath. I'm on my way, traffic's insane." I listened. I could hear noise in the background, but it didn't sound like traffic. It sounded contained, like an echo in a hallway, a door closing, a muffled voice. "Okay," I said carefully, "you're driving." "Mum," he replied too quickly, "hands-free, don't worry." We hung up and I stood there with the phone still in my hand, staring at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. My face looked the same, my expression didn't. He walked in 20 minutes later, tie loosened, shirt wrinkled in that believable way work shirts get wrinkled. "Sorry," he said, kissing my forehead, "you didn't have to wait." "It's fine," I replied, "just wanted your food to be hot." We ate, we talked about Noah's upcoming baseball game, about Emily's math test. The kids argued about something small. Daniel laughed genuinely, and for a moment I hated myself for doubting him. After dinner, he took his plate to the sink, sleeves rolled up, the muscles in his forearms flexing as he rinsed dishes. It was such a familiar sight that my chest tightened with something like grief. "What happened at work?" I asked casually, leaning against the counter. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. If I hadn't been already paying too much attention, I would have missed it. "Just a tenant issue," he said. "Someone upset about a notice, nothing exciting." "Notice for what?" I asked. "Late rent," he replied almost automatically. "You know how it is, people think yelling is going to change due dates." He smiled to soften it, drying his hands, reaching for a towel. I nodded, said something noncommittal, and let the moment pass. But that's when I realized something. In 17 years of marriage, Daniel had never been vague with me about work. He liked to explain, to talk through his day, to make me understand the stress he carried. He'd come home and say, "You won't believe what happened. This guy tried to keep 6 dogs in a 1-bedroom." Or, "They want to cram 4 people into a studio and pretend it's legal." We used to joke that sometimes his job sounded more like social work than property management, but lately his stories had gotten shorter, more edited, like he was trimming the rough edges off his day before bringing it home. The next morning, I noticed another change. His phone. Now, I'm not the type of woman who goes through a man's phone, not because I think it's some sacred object, but because I've always believed that if you have to dig that hard for the truth, you already have it. But habits tell on people. Daniel used to leave his phone anywhere, on the coffee table, on the kitchen counter, charging in the hallway. It was just there, background. That week his phone was always within reach, in his pocket, face down, on silent. On Saturday, we were in the living room, the television humming softly while Noah played a video game in the corner. Daniel's phone lit up on the arm of the couch. He reached for it faster than I'd ever seen him move for a device. "Work," he said, even though I hadn't asked. He didn't open the message, he just flipped the phone over so the screen faced down. "No one should be messaging you this much from work on a Saturday," I said lightly, trying to sound more amused than suspicious. He shrugged, "These owners don't understand weekends." I smiled. On the outside, it probably looked natural. Inside, I felt like someone had turned down the oxygen in the room. Later that afternoon, while he was in the shower and the kids were outside, I passed by the bathroom door and heard him speaking over the water. His voice was low, almost a whisper. I couldn't key out the words, just the tone, not angry, not businesslike, something softer, careful. I froze in the hallway, my heart beating in my throat. Then I heard my name. "No, she doesn't know. Listen, I'll fix it before she has to find out, okay? I promise, just trust me." There are moments where your body answers before your mind does. My stomach dropped, my hands went cold. The stranger's voice from that Tuesday echoed back. He made a huge mistake. I stepped back silently, forcing myself to breathe, to move, to act like I hadn't just tripped over something invisible. I went to the kitchen, opened a cabinet I didn't need to open, stared at the neatly stacked plates while trying to steady my hands. A part of me wanted to storm back, fling open that bathroom door, demand answers. But another part, the steadier, older part, knew you don't confront someone in the middle of their lie if you want the whole truth. You wait. You watch. You let them think they're safe. That night, Daniel was extra affectionate. He brought me a cup of tea without me asking, joined me on the couch and pulled me close, his fingers tracing circles on the back of my hand. "You okay?" he asked. "You've been quiet today." "I'm fine," I said. It was only half a lie. I was fine in the sense that nothing had actually exploded yet. But emotionally, I felt like I was sitting in a room where someone had lit a fuse, waiting to find out which corner of my life would ignite first. When he went to bed, I stayed up, pretending to scroll through recipes and news articles. My mind wasn't on the screen. I kept replaying the stranger's face in my memory. The way he'd said, if it were my wife, the way he hadn't given details, as if whatever Daniel had done was too complicated, too tangled to explain in a parking lot. I should have told someone, a friend, my sister, my mother. But there's a strange loyalty that comes with long marriages. Even when you're hurt, even when you're scared, part of you still wants to protect the person who might be the one breaking you. So I swallowed it all and decided to do what I'd always done when life felt too big. I made a list. On Sunday morning, while everyone else was still asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a pen. The early light stretched long across the countertops, highlighting crumbs I'd missed from the night before. The house smelled like stale toast and the faint sweetness of fabric softener. At the top of a cheap notepad, I wrote, "Things that don't add up. Stranger at the pharmacy. Daniel coming home late, traffic. Phone always on silent, face down. Phone call in the shower, she doesn't know, I'll fix it. Vague answers about work." I stared at the list, feeling both foolish and strangely vindicated. On their own, any one of those things could have an explanation. Together, they drew a shape I didn't like. My eyes drifted to the pantry where we kept the file box, leases, bills, mortgage papers, all the boring, important things we rarely thought about. That's when another thought slid quietly into my mind. If a stranger cared enough to warn me, maybe I needed to start caring enough to look. I didn't go looking for the truth right away. That surprises people when I tell them this story now, but it's the honest part. I wasn't brave, I wasn't calculated, I was scared. Scared that if I pulled too hard on the loose thread, the whole sweater of my life would come apart in my hands. So instead I watched. I watched the way Daniel moved through our home like a guest, lately polite, careful, always slightly on edge. I watched how he checked his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, his thumb hovering before he typed, as if he were editing himself even there. I watched how he answered questions now with smiles that reached his mouth but not his eyes. And I watched myself. How I second-guessed every instinct, how I reread texts for hidden meanings, how I replayed conversations in my head long after they ended, searching for the moment where the truth might have slipped through his carefully controlled words. The children noticed first. Kids always do. "Is Dad mad at me?" Noah asked one night as I tucked him in, his voice small in the dim glow of his lamp. "No, honey," I said immediately, brushing his hair back. "Why would you think that?" "He doesn't joke with me anymore," he said. He just says later all the time. My chest tightened. He's just busy, things at work. Noah nodded, accepting the answer because that's what children do when the person they trust most sounds certain. Emily was harder to fool. On Wednesday evening, she cornered me in the kitchen while Daniel was outside taking a call, another one. "You and Dad are acting weird," she said plainly, arms crossed over her hoodie. "Did something happen?" "No," I said too quickly. "Why?" "You don't look at him the same," she said. "You look like you're waiting for something." I opened my mouth to deny it and closed it again. There's something about teenagers, how perceptive they can be when it comes to emotional shifts. They live in a world where feelings are always just under the surface. "Sometimes adults have things on their mind," I said carefully. "That doesn't always mean something bad." She studied my face for a moment longer, then nodded, but she didn't look convinced. That night, Daniel came to bed after me. I felt the mattress dip under his weight, felt the warmth of him beside me, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind felt too full, too loud. After a while he spoke. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, staring up at the ceiling. Have I done something to upset you?" There it was, laid carefully between us. I turned onto my side to face him. In the dim light, I could just make out his expression. Concern, yes, but also something else. Anticipation, maybe. "No," I said. "Why would you think that?" "You've been distant," he said. "I just wanted to make sure we're okay." The question was almost gentle, almost loving. I searched his face for cracks, for guilt, for fear. "We're okay," I said finally. The lie slid out too easily. He relaxed visibly, reached for my hand. "Good," he murmured. "I'd hate to think something was off between us." The next morning, after Daniel left for work and the kids were gone, I stood in front of the pantry for a long moment before opening the door. The file box sat on the top shelf exactly where it always did, blue plastic, slightly scratched on one corner. I pulled it down, set it on the table, and lifted the lid. Mortgages, tax returns, insurance documents, everything neatly labeled in Daniel's handwriting. Except one folder near the back. It wasn't unlabeled, but the label was new. Property Sunset Ridge. Sunset Ridge meant nothing to me. My heart began to pound, loud enough that I wondered if the neighbors could hear it through the walls. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents I'd never seen before. Legal-looking, dense with fine print, dates from the last 6 months. My eyes scanned for words that felt familiar: owner, purchaser, transfer. Then I saw our address. The room tilted slightly. I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. This couldn't be right. I read it again, slower this time. Our house was listed as collateral in an agreement tied to a development project, a property venture under Daniel's management. The terms were careful, technical, designed to look harmless if you didn't know what you were looking at. But one sentence stood out, sharp and undeniable. "In the event of default, ownership may transfer to." I didn't finish reading it the first time. I sat down hard in the nearest chair, my legs suddenly weak. Daniel hadn't sold the house, not yet. But he had risked it. Without telling me. Without my consent. My hands shook as I flipped through the rest of the folder. There were signatures, his, not mine. Dates, deadlines. And then I saw a business card tucked into the back sleeve. Same name from the letterhead on the documents. The stranger from the pharmacy flashed through my mind, the way he'd hesitated, the way he'd looked almost guilty. Could he be connected to this? That afternoon, I did confront Daniel. I didn't call a lawyer, I didn't cry. Instead, I did something far simpler. I Googled Sunset Ridge Development and clicked on the first result. A local news article popped up. New mixed-use development project stalled due to investor dispute. My eyes skimmed the screen, heart racing. The article mentioned delays, disagreements, and my stomach clenched: financial mismanagement. One paragraph was bolded. Sources indicate that several properties were leveraged without full transparency, placing families at risk should the project collapse. Families. Plural. I sat back, the weight of it pressing down on me all at once. This wasn't a small mistake, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a gamble. And Daniel had placed our home on the table without even asking me if I was willing to play. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from Daniel. Running late again, meetings ran over, sorry. I stared at the message, the words blurring slightly as my eyes filled. For the first time, I didn't feel confused. I felt clear. And clarity, I was learning, could hurt just as much as betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't collapse onto the floor the way movies like to show betrayal. Instead, I closed the laptop slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter what little composure I had left. That was the most frightening part, how calm I felt, not peaceful, not numb, just steady, like something inside me had finally clicked into place. Daniel came home close to 9 that night. I heard his key in the door while I was standing at the sink, rinsing a mug that didn't need rinsing. I didn't turn around when he walked in. I listened instead to the familiar sounds I'd known for nearly 2 decades, his hose kicked off by the door, the sigh he always made after a long day, the quiet hum of routine. Hey, he said, sorry again, today just wouldn't end. I kept my eyes on the sink. Did you eat? Not really, he replied, I'll grab something later. He stepped closer, kissed my temple. I didn't flinch, but something in my stillness must have spoken for me because he paused. You sure you're okay? He asked. I turned then, looked directly at him. Who is he? I asked. The words landed between us like broken glass. His face drained of color so fast I almost felt sorry for him. What? He said. The man from the pharmacy, I continued, my voice calm, even, the one who told me you made a huge mistake. Who is he, Daniel? For a moment I thought he might deny it, lie his way out. That's what I expected, what I'd prepared myself to fight. But instead his shoulders slumped. He looked tired, exposed. You met him? He asked quietly. My heart twisted. So you do know who I'm talking about. He rubbed his face, pacing once across the living room before stopping, hands on his hips. He didn't look angry, he looked cornered. He shouldn't have said anything, he muttered. Daniel, I said, my voice sharpening despite myself, answer the question. He exhaled slowly. His name is Marcus, he was an investor. Was, I repeated, meaning he isn't anymore. Daniel laughed once, not humor, panic. Things got complicated. I walked to the pantry, opened the door, and pulled out the blue file box. I set it on the table between us, opened the folder to the first document, and slid it toward him. These are complicated too, I said, especially the part where our house is listed as collateral. He didn't touch the papers. You went through my files, he said softly. I stared at him. You risked our home. Silence stretched tight between us. Finally, he sat down heavily in the chair across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was about to pray. I was trying to fix things, he said. Fix what? I asked. He looked up, eyes glossy. Us. That nearly broke me. You don't get to use us as an excuse, I said, my voice trembling now. Not for this. He swallowed. I wanted more for our family, the kids, you. I'm stuck in a job that barely moves anymore. When this opportunity came up, it felt like a way out. So you decided alone? I asked. I was going to tell you, he said quickly, once it worked. And if it did? I asked. He didn't answer. I stood there, staring at the man I'd trusted with my life, my finances, my future. The man who used to ask my opinion about everything from paint colors to which route to take on road trips, and realized just how far he'd already stepped away from me. What about Marcus? I asked. Why did he warn me? Daniel hesitated, then, because he pulled out, he didn't like how things were being handled. And you did? I asked. No, he admitted, but by the time I realized how bad it was already in motion. I picked up the business card from the folder and held it between my fingers. So you thought risking our house was better than losing face? He winced. That's not fair, he said quietly. No, I replied. What's not fair is finding out a stranger cared enough about my future to warn me when my own husband didn't. That hit him harder than anything else I'd said. I could see it in the way his mouth opened, then closed like he couldn't find a response. I was scared, he said. Every day I woke up thinking, what if today it all comes crashing down? I didn't want you to look at me like I'd failed. So instead, I said, you gave me something worse. Tears slid down his face then, unchecked and clumsy. It startled me. Daniel didn't cry easily, not like that. I never meant to hurt you, he whispered. I believed him. And somehow that made it worse. Meaning doesn't erase impact, I said softly. The kids were asleep upstairs. The house felt heavy with unspoken consequences. This wasn't just about money anymore or trust. It was about the quiet, private agreement we'd made years ago that we would be partners, that neither of us would make decisions that could destroy the other's footing without standing side by side. That agreement was shattered. You need to end it, I said, whatever this deal is now. He shook his head slowly. I can't, not without losing everything I put in. And what happens if it collapses? I asked. Our house is protected, he said weakly, mostly. Mostly. That's not an answer, I said. He looked at me like a man realizing too late that the bridge behind him was gone. That night I slept in the guest room. Lying in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar silence, I realized something crucial. Daniel hadn't just made a bad decision. He had made one that assumed I'd stay quiet once I found out. And that, more than the risk or the secrecy, was the mistake that changed everything. I didn't fall asleep until just before dawn. The guest room smelled key, old books and lavender sachets I'd tucked into the drawers years ago, back when my mother came to visit and said the room felt too empty. I lay there staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan, listening for sounds from the other side of the house. Daniel didn't come after me. That hurt more than I expected. By morning, my sadness had settled into something harder, heavier, resolve. I packed lunches, woke the kids, moved through the routines like a woman reciting lines she'd memorized long ago. Daniel stayed in the bedroom until after they left. We passed each other once in the hallway, close enough that I could smell his familiar aftershave. Can we talk later? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, but not here. That afternoon, I took a half day off work for the first time in years, not because I was sick, not because the kids needed me. Because I finally needed myself. I drove across town to a small brick building with a discreet sign out front, family and estate law offices. I'd passed it 100 times without ever imagining I'd walk through those doors. The waiting room was calm in the way places like that always are: neutral colors, soft chairs, a faint hum of someone else's problems hidden behind closed doors. I filled out paperwork with hands that were steadier than I felt. When the attorney, Ms. Alvarez, called my name, I followed her into a small office and told her everything. She didn't gasp, didn't judge, just listened, nodding occasionally, asking careful questions. You did the right thing coming in, she said when I was finished, and I need to be clear with you, what your husband did is serious. Is it legal? I asked. She tilted her head. That depends on how the documents were executed and how marital assets are treated under your state laws, but morally, it's a violation of trust. Financial infidelity is still infidelity. That phrase stayed with me. Financial infidelity. He believes the house is mostly protected, I said bitterly. She gave a small, knowing smile. That usually means it is. We reviewed timelines, documents, worst-case scenarios. This project is already unstable, she said. If it fails, yes, your home could be at risk. Something inside me hardened into certainty. What can I do? I asked. She looked at me carefully. You can intervene, legally. You can also protect yourself and your children by ensuring transparency going forward, but this will not stay private if it escalates. I don't want revenge, I said. I just want the truth out in the open. She nodded. That's often what accountability looks like. When I left her office, I sat in my car for a moment, breathing, not crying, just breathing. For the first time in weeks, I felt grounded, anchored. That evening, I asked Daniel to meet me at the diner down the street. Neutral ground, fluorescent lights, no walls filled with memories. He was already there when I arrived, coffee untouched in front of him, shoulders hunched like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "You talked to a lawyer," he said quietly, not quite a question. "Yes," I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. He ran a hand through his hair. "You're serious?" "I've always been serious about us," I said. "That's the difference." He exhaled, eyes dropping to the table. "Marcus told me he warned you." "So he confirmed it," I said. "He said he couldn't live with himself if he didn't," Daniel admitted. "He's pulling out completely. He wanted me to do the same." "And did you?" I asked. "No," he said, "not yet." The waitress came by, cheerful and oblivious, asking if we were ready to order. I requested tea. Daniel waved her away. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, calm but unwavering. "You're going to disclose everything to me, to the legal team overseeing that project, and if it goes public, you will not hide." His eyes snapped up. "You want me to ruin myself?" "I want you to stop hiding behind me," I said. "There's a difference." Silence settled between us. "This could cost me my job," he said. "I know," I replied. "It could cost us our home, that's why we're here." He stared at his hands for a long time, then he nodded once. "Okay," he said, "I'll do it." The following weeks unfolded slowly, painfully, and in full view of everyone Daniel had tried to impress. There were meetings, emails, tense phone calls that ended in raised voices. I sat in some rooms not as decoration but as a presence. People noticed. Questions were asked. And then, as secrets tend to do, the truth seeped outward. The development project collapsed under scrutiny, investors withdrew, audits began. Daniel's name surfaced quietly at first, then more loudly. And something strange happened. Instead of feeling victorious, I felt steady. I watched him face the consequences he'd tried so hard to avoid. His coworkers looked at him differently. His parents asked uncomfortable questions. Even the kids began to sense a shift. "Is Dad in trouble?" Noah asked one night. "He made some mistakes," I said honestly, "and now he has to fix them." "What about us?" Emily asked softly. I took her hand. "We're going to be okay." Daniel moved into the guest room permanently, not at my insistence, but because he said he needed to understand what he'd nearly lost. One evening, weeks later, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I thought success would make me worthy." I looked at him, truly looked. "You were always worthy," I said, "you just stopped believing it." The stranger from the pharmacy texted once. "I'm glad you handled it the way you did, I'm sorry." I never replied. Some closures don't need words. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves. First, it was Daniel's job, not fired outright but sidelined. Meetings he used to lead were reassigned. Emails stopped coming. His name was quietly removed from projects that mattered. The office didn't exile him dramatically, it did something worse. It made him irrelevant. I could see it wearing on him in small ways. His shoulders sank when he got home. He stopped shaving as carefully. The confident stride he used to have gone, replaced by something hesitant, almost apologetic. People in our circle noticed too. At a neighborhood barbecue, someone asked too casually, "So how's that big project going?" and then glanced at me just a little too quickly as if to read my reaction. Daniel muttered something vague and excused himself to refill the cooler. I stayed. That was the first real consequence. Visibility. The second wave was more public. A short article appeared in the local business section, nothing sensational, just a few paragraphs tucked between ads and community updates. It mentioned the development, the investigation, and unnamed management errors that placed private residences at risk. Daniel read it twice at the kitchen table, his fingers tightening around the paper. "They didn't use my name," he said, almost hopeful. "Not yet," I replied gently. By the end of the month, the whispers had become conversations. Parents at school drop-offs spoke in lowered voices. Friends didn't ask me for details, but their questions hovered just beneath the surface of every interaction. The hardest part wasn't the judgment. It was the pity. At dinner one night, Daniel finally said what I'd been waiting for him to say. "I was wrong," he said, staring at his plate, "not just about the project, about everything." I looked at him not angrily, not kindly, just honestly. I know, I said. Our marriage was in an in-between place, no screaming matches, no dramatic ultimatums, just distance filled with uncomfortable truth. He began therapy on his own, not as a show, not as an attempt to win me back. I don't trust my instincts anymore, he told me once. I need to understand why I thought I could gamble with our safety and call it ambition. The children adjusted in their own ways. Emily became quieter, more observant. I caught her watching us like she was memorizing something she might need later in life. One evening, she said, "I don't want to marry someone who makes decisions without me." I hugged her tightly. "No one deserves that," I said. Noah asked simpler questions. Is Dad moving out? Did we do something wrong? No, I told him every time. Adults mess up too. The third wave came unexpectedly. Daniel's parents came over one Sunday afternoon. No announcement, no warning. His mother sat stiffly on the couch, purse clutched in her lap like armor. "We heard things," she began, "from a friend. We thought we should talk." Daniel stared at the floor. I answered calmly, "You can ask me." She hesitated. "Did you know?" "Not until recently," I said. She nodded slowly, processing. Then, to my surprise, she turned to her son. "What were you thinking?" she asked, her voice tight. Daniel didn't defend himself, didn't shift blame. "I wasn't," he said. That moment mattered. Responsibility has a sound, and that was it. After they left, Daniel sat at the dining table long after dark, staring at nothing. I made tea and placed a mug in front of him. He flinched slightly, then nodded in thanks. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I considered the question honestly. "No," I said, "but I don't trust you, not yet." He nodded. "That feels fair." In the quiet that followed, I realized something important. The consequences weren't just for him. They were for me too. I had to decide whether I would rebuild or walk away. And I couldn't rush that decision, not for him, not for the kids, not to prove anything to anyone watching from the edges. One evening, while sorting through mail, I found a notice from the mortgage company. Routine, informational. For the first time since discovering the documents, I didn't panic when my eyes skimmed the text. The legal intervention had worked. Our home was secure, no longer attached to his private risk. That piece of safety felt like oxygen. Daniel noticed the letter on the counter later and let out a breath he'd clear. "Why been holding for weeks?" "I'm glad," he said quietly, "you protected us." I didn't correct him. Because it was true. As summer faded into early fall, the house began to feel less tense, not healed, but less fragile. The air no longer felt like it might shatter with one wrong word. One night, Daniel stood in the doorway of the guest room. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "or reconciliation. I just want you to know whatever you decide, I'll accept it." That was new too. The man who once gambled our future now stood waiting for my decision without trying to shape it. Growth, I learned, doesn't erase damage. But it does change what